Mr. Burke, Mr. Peter Burke, how does one stay married? Let's start with that nice easy one.
How does one stay married? That's a great question. Because marriage, in my experience personally, and having walked with 500 or so guys over the last 15 years in this process, is it's hard.
Yeah.
I'd like to sit here and say, piece of cake, just commit and you'll both be fine. But the reality is, and based on our discussions previously, that God is up to something really profound in our marriages, not just in our marriage relationship, but in us personally. And so I think the short answer to your great question is it has a lot to do with our ability to be transformed in this process from a relatively selfish, self-oriented person to somebody who is more sacrificial and selfless and caring and all the things I think God is up to in our kind of adult life. And when two people figure that out, and I think it's a wrestling match for most of the marriage, but when they figure that out, that's when the harmony happens. Doesn't mean it's perfect, but it means the strength, the intimacy, the communications, and all those other things come because we figure out it's not all about us. In fact, I'm right now in the process of writing an ebook on that topic. It's not about you. It's about something bigger than you.
Yeah. You said something interesting there. It's about our ability to be transformed. What do you mean by that? Is it different from person to person? Is it our ability to be introspective and hear guidance from other people, to listen to what God is saying to us? Is that what you mean? I'm curious.
The transformation that I tend to focus on, and there's a basic premise I should take one small step backwards on and say, for the Jesus follower, there's two things I'm convinced that God wants for us. One is he wants us to be his,
Mm.
right? And we call that salvation. That's the fancy Christian term. And then following that salvation, and we're filled with the Holy Spirit, the real transformation for the rest of our earthly existence is to be transformed to be more and more like Christ before we die, maybe the last moment we're alive. And so that's the transformation and some people would argue, if you look in Galatians and the verse that talks about the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, kindness, goodness, all those great things, that's the transformation from a fairly kind of innately selfish person to somebody who's transformed to be others centric and to care. Jesus was asked, what really matters in all those laws in the Old Testament? What really matters? He said, it's really simple: love God and love others. Well, in our core self, it's mostly about loving me, and then if I've got a little extra, then I'll figure out how to share that. So I think the transformation has more to do with that. And a lot of guys come into these workshops saying to themselves, well, if you'll just tell me what to say when she fires a missile my way, we'll be fine. Or if you know my wife, then you'll be able to have clarity on how we can fix this. And the reality is the transformation really starts in me, as opposed to anybody else.
Yeah, you focus. I love your focus because you focus more. It's more of an extreme ownership focus. You can't control her, which is true. You can't control anybody. You can only control yourself.
That's right.
But I'd love for you to speak to the person out there, myself included, right? To the person who's like, yeah, but my wife, like, or my girlfriend, or but if you only knew like how she really talks and what she says, and if you only knew,
Right.
like, you would let me off the hook here and you talk to her. Talk to that person, because I feel like there's a lot of people out there, and myself included, that it thought that creeps in there, and you're like,
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
but so
Yeah. Because our base assumption, there's this concept psychologists call cognitive dissonance. And
Mm,
the reality is we can't even sleep at night if we can't somehow rationalize that we're not the problem, that somebody else is really the problem.
interesting.
And this is why marriage counseling, in more cases than I wish were true, struggles because the couple goes into a marriage counselor, male or female, and secretly in their mind, they're saying to themselves as they're walking in the door, man, I hope this person can really give her clarity about what her blind spots or what she's missing or how good she has it or whatever that thing is. Well, she's saying the same thing as she's walking through the threshold of that door. And the frustration comes because you leave an hour later and you say, well, all she did was ask us questions, and how does that make you feel? And you're frustrated because you were certain that it was going to be clear to everybody in the room, because it already is to you,
Mm,
that she's the problem, or she's thinking you're the problem. And that's where it all falls apart. And that's why I say, no, let's start from a different place. Let's kind of start with, what does God want for us and for me? And to your point a minute ago, the only thing I can control is me.
yeah.
But here's the cool part about this whole premise is when we take that, what I call vertical orientation, Kyle, I'm absolutely now convinced empirically, because I've walked with enough guys now over a long period of time, that our spouse, God will do a mighty work in him or her. I actually believe either the man or the woman could kind of take this first step and say, I'm going to go on a vertical path towards Christ likeness.
Yeah.
I'm going to be sacrificial and selfless. And then I'm going to trust that God's going to do a mighty work in her, in my spouse, when I start this vertical path. And that's when the fun happens, because it isn't about somebody fixing anybody else. It's about me determining what I'm called to do and what God wants for me. And then just trust God to do a mighty work in your spouse.
Yeah. How, how does one let go of that though? Like how do you get to the place where you let go of, yeah, but, and
Yeah.
and it's just responding with grace and with kindness when your spouse says something sharp or throws a little dagger or it's an undercut or undermining or whatever. How do you let that go and really focus on, I'm just going to respond like Jesus would respond?
Well, two-part answer. The first part is, I think the innate thing inside us that prevents us from continuing that path and when those missiles come our way is pride.
Mm,
And pride comes from who we are as men. It comes from our childhood. It comes from triggers and hurts that we have and traumas that people have in their past. And so when my wife, when Devaney says something that in her mind is really innocent, and I hear it in a different way, right? My pride says that's not fair, and that deserves a response, an equal and perhaps even a greater response. And that might be a fiery retort. It might be the silent treatment. It might be pouting. I mean, it can take a lot of forms, right? So the second part to my answer to your great question is, there's this thing we have in our back pocket that I call the fairness doctrine. And the fairness doctrine is really simple. It's in your back pocket right now, and it's in mine, unfortunately, more days than I care to confess. And it says basically, I'm willing to be a good guy and a good husband and be Christ-like, as long as dot 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 whatever my expectation is
yeah.
for what is fair. And the problem with the fairness doctrine, and the reason it gets in the way of us continuing on this vertical path, is it doesn't feel fair to us.
Yeah.
That's the third time she's done that this week, and I haven't done it at all. Well, that deserves a response. And I have found that if we men can tear up the fairness doctrine and just commit to ourselves and to God that we are going to be Christ-like in a non-contingent way. We're going to do it regardless of anybody else's behavior. And of course, the objection I get, and probably a lot of your listeners are going to be, their first objection is, okay, let me get this straight, Peter. I'm willing to do it for a week, but if it don't change in a week, then the fairness doctrine comes back out, right?
Yeah.
Well, one of my favorite authors on this topic is a guy named Ken Nair, a pastor in Arizona, who wrote a book called Discovering the Mind of a Woman. And he's famous for saying, when somebody asks, well, how long will it take? If I really behave myself, how long will it take? How long should I commit? And he says, that's easy. How long did it take you to get here? Okay. And his point is, you're thinking if I behave for a week or two, or maybe even 5, because you're a really good guy, then that's long enough. And he says, if it's 14 years into your marriage and you guys have kind of dug yourself into this ditch, for you to think it's going to change in 5 weeks is just absolutely unrealistic. Because the first thing she's thinking when you decide to go Christ-like is there's a skepticism. Right. It says, no, Kyle, I've seen this play before. I know how this ends. You go back to, the way you used to be, or as soon as you feel a missile coming your way, you're going to get defensive and prideful. So that's my long-winded way of answering your simple question.
Yeah. Is it possible? Well, actually, I want you to talk about that, because I remember when we were in your program, your 6-week program, you said something pretty interesting, which I think a lot of people have heard and maybe intuitively know, but I want it to be discussed here. The 5-to-1 rule or 3-to-1 rule, where it's, hey, if you do something, let's just bad, I'll throw that term. If you do something bad, where you're sharp, or you return a response that you shouldn't have, or you forget to pick something up when she asks you to do it, or whatever. There's that 5-to-1 rule where it takes 5 good things to counteract that one bad thing. I would love for you to chat a little bit about that.
Well, let me give you the context for that, because I didn't design it, but the person who did is probably the preeminent researcher on marriage. Excuse me. His name is John Gottman. He also works in conjunction with his wife, and the research that he does is he studies marriages. He actually videotapes. One of the things he does that is fascinating to me is he'll videotape a couple for about 45 minutes. And he can tell in those 45 minutes, with giving that couple a few questions and discussion points to talk about, he'll go back and study the tape, and he can tell you with 93% accuracy whether or not you're going to divorce in 45 minutes. And the premise, it's crazy. I know, and it's wow. Absolutely stunning. And what here's where it comes from. He has this concept called bids, and it's actually even worse than you described, because awesome. What you said is, if you want to be really demoralized, right? Instead of, when you say some nasty retort back, that's a -1. What he really refers to in bids, maybe a great example of this is your wife is in the kitchen and sees a beautiful red cardinal out the window and says, "Look, honey, isn't this cool?" And the husband basically either ignores or grunts or says, "Yeah, I'll bet it's cool," right? Basically, she's wanting to engage and connect in some small way, and you're busy with whatever it may be, including Monday Night Football or whatever the distraction of the moment is, and you now have scored -1. You didn't say anything nasty. You didn't do anything wrong. You just didn't catch her bid.
Yeah.
And what the Gottmans have declared is that there are masters in marriage and there are disasters in marriage. And they say a master in marriage has 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative interaction. And it kind of begs the question, what's a disaster marriage? Well, you're thinking probably logically, it must be -5 to 1, right? That would be a disaster. And they say, no, it's 1 to 1.
Yeah.
It's literally, and it's not, again, it's not a nasty comment. It's your wife says you want to go for a walk, right? You say, oh, I'm tired. No thanks.
Mm.
Now you're thinking, well, that's a reasonable response. Well, in the Gottman's language, that's a -1 because she wants to connect and you're basically, not responding to that bid. And it goes both ways.
Yeah.
Well, if you have one positive for every one negative, you're in the disaster category. And here's the bottom line. The Gottmans concluded that marriages don't die of crises most of the time. They tend to die because of 1,000 cuts, or what I call the drip, drip, drip. And when a man and a woman in a relatively short period of time forget what it means to be kind and gracious in the day-to-day interactions. Your wife says, hey, honey, do you have the clicker as you're sitting there in the living room? And you look at her and you say, yes, right? And you're acknowledging, yes, I have it, but she wasn't asking if you have the clicker, right? She was basically saying, I don't like what you're watching. And
Yeah.
I
Change the
would
channel.
bingo, bingo. I'm not. It has nothing to do with the clicker. It has everything to do with the content on the television. But we think we're being gracious by saying, yes, I do. Thanks for asking, right? And that's just the way over time, when a marriage loses their ability to be kind and to respond to bids and to connect in those day-to-day things, that's what leads to the disconnection and ultimately to the divorce. And why divorce? The epidemic in divorce is the 25-year marriage
Yeah.
because the
Oh,
kids are gone,
yeah.
right? It's just you and she. You don't have that much in common. You fully invested in the children, and in a crazy way, that's where marriages die.
Yeah, that is so sad. And I want to come back to that if we have time. But another thing that's so fascinating, because when you mentioned the red cardinal thing, my I almost had like a sadness come up inside me because I imagined like my son being like, Dad, look at the cardinal. He's 3. I would have no problem engaging with that. And like, I know, dude, look at it fly. And you're there, you're invested in it. You think it's so cool because he thinks it's cool. But when your wife does it, you're just like, oh yeah, that is cool. And you kind of move on. Or maybe you don't even acknowledge it. But why is it so hard to not be as enthusiastic and as engaged as she might want you to be in that moment, just to connect? You talked a little bit about this in your program as well, but let's dive into that for people, because I think it's a very common thing. The people we're closest to, we end up treating the worst, and it's really baffling.
Yeah, it is baffling. Yeah, literally, you treat people at work better than you treat the people, in particular our spouse, and partially because we're on our best behavior outside the house. But let's go back to the point of a few minutes ago, which is, what is this transformation all about?
Mm.
And the reality is you're sitting on the couch and your wife says, come look at this red cardinal. You've made an instantaneous judgment that I'm busy. I'm in the middle of crafting an email. I'm sending it out to my clients. I need to respond to this urgent situation. And you've rationalized that you have other priorities. And of course, you rest in that decision because she knows I love her and we've been together for years. And I really need to tend to this priority. And so we make those choices. We make 130 of those a day, right? And here's the scary reality. And I love your example of your 3-year-old. That the reason you reprioritize the 3-year-old is you knew it would take 30 seconds. You knew he would be deeply appreciative and fascinated. You get to see the joy in his eyes. And you know that your wife will understand, right? And that's the difference. And here's the problem. Now put yourself in the shoes of your spouse. She said, hey, isn't this cool? I think you'd really enjoy seeing this. You basically dismiss it.
Yeah.
In her brain, she's not saying to herself, man, I wish he liked red cardinals better, right? She's saying something far more profound.
Yeah.
She's saying, I can't believe this guy is constantly preoccupied by things other than what I care about.
Yeah.
And it goes so deep. Literally, the Gottmans say it starts out as almost kind of cute, where when you're engaged and your head's down and you don't respond, she says, "Man, he's so focused on his work. It's so cool to see somebody that dedicated, right?" And then a year into the marriage, it's like kind of irritating. I can't believe he's so distracted. And then 5 years, 10 years, if she's talking to her friend about that habit, she says, I actually have contempt for this thing. And it gets worse and worse and worse. And that's why, again, it sounds so simple to transform you and transform a marriage. But when you decide that I'm going to respond to those bids, for her first reaction is, what happened to Kyle and where did he go? Right? Because this is not the guy who, 2 weeks ago would have blown me off. And then, by the way, in the dark of night, when she says, man, I can't believe how attentive and responsive Kyle has been, she says to herself, I'm not sure I'm reciprocating, right? And all of a sudden now, instead of going into the toilet, you start going the opposite way, where we respond to each other's bids and connect in a way where it becomes natural and normal. And that's where the cool part of this whole process is.
Yeah. I'm going to reveal a little bit of my own selfishness here. Maybe I shouldn't, but I'm going to do it anyway. As I hear you chat about this, there's a part of me that's like, I guess I've still got the fairness doctrine inside of me, right? It's like, well, where's the line? Like, how much of myself am I supposed to give? Where, like, what if I can't get any work done because she's asking questions and I want to engage and bid and meet these bids where they're at, but I can't get any of the work done that I actually need to get done, or
Yeah.
I can't do anything for myself because of X, Y, and Z. Is there a line, or is there not a line? And how do you
Yeah.
find it if so? Because I think a lot of people out there might be wondering that.
I think there is definitely a line, and some would put it in the category of boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
John Townsend and Henry Cloud have written a series of books on healthy boundaries in relationships. So, to use your simple example, if you responded to every single bid that you might not get anything done, but that requires a separate discussion that is not in the heat of the moment. It's not in the middle of an invitation. It's when you guys have a date night and you say, hey, one of the things I struggle with is, can we talk about how to do that well, where I don't hurt your feelings, but I still feel like I'm being sensitive to you and all those things. My simple personal example, and I actually got this tip from a friend of mine at a solely business retreat, which doesn't matter to your listeners, but Sonny Newton was a guy who had a concept, said, don't let your dog put you to shame in terms of being attentive to your wife, right? And his little story is, when his wife came home, the dog he had, regardless of where the dog was in whatever part of the house or the county, when she heard the garage door go up, would dash to the back door, wag the tail until the door opened, and make his wife feel like the most important person in the entire world, right? And I thought to myself, man, I'm this type A guy. I'm heads down in my office. I have a home office. My wife comes home, garage door goes up. I hear she's coming in. I'm sure she'll come in eventually, and I'll say hello, and hopefully I won't be in a call. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm an idiot, right? How hard would it be if she comes in the house 3 times today? Just, we'll make it up, right? She goes to the store once, she comes back from an errand, whatever it is, 3 times. And I go to the back door, I give her a hug, I say, how was the trip? Help her bring in groceries, take 2 minutes, and I burn 6 minutes that day because that happened 3 times. Now, how hard is that? My type A guy who would never do that would say, well, that's a pain in the butt, and she understands, right? Literally, I hate to, don't let this sound braggadocious because I'm still an idiot, right? But literally, literally every time she comes home now, if I'm not on a Zoom call, I promise I won't do it today, right, with you. But if I'm not on a call like this, it is my habit now, and it's so simple to do. And I love that little hug we have 3 times a day, and it makes a big difference. So that's
That's cool.
I guess, my view.
Yeah, no, I love that. You know who does a great job of that? I saw it firsthand because I actually lived with Dustin, our pastor.
Uh,
For those of you who don't know, Northside Church in Georgia, Roswell, Georgia, our pastor's name is Dustin. I lived with him for a little while. And I saw April, his wife, come in numerous times, and Dustin would always be like, April, hey. And at first I thought it was weird. You know, I'm like, what are you
or an
doing?
act, right?
Yeah, like what's going on? But he just did it all the time. I saw it all the time. And now that I'm, having this conversation with you and I've grown a little bit over the years, I realize, he was really making an effort to make her feel seen and like valued. And I'm like, man, that's very cool. And I'm sure if Dustin was on here, he'd be like, yeah, well, I do a lot of other things wrong, but he
Yeah.
does do that thing really well. And it's speaking from my own personal experience, I always felt a little weird doing it. Did you ever feel weird doing it? What would you
I
say
think
to me or
whenever you
someone else?
start, there's another concept kind of in the same category. Reggie Campbell shared this with me years ago, and he'd call it 5 feet for 5 minutes. So
Oh yeah.
you come in from work, and your first inclination, mine was, let me take my briefcase to my office, let me set up my PC, let me go change my clothes, let me go say hi to the kids, and then I'll be back. Well, what did that just communicate?
She's not as important.
She's like fourth on the list after I'm comfortable, after I set up my PC, after all these things. He says, no, put your briefcase down, go to the kitchen, tell the kids if they start pulling on your pant legs, kids, I need 5 minutes with the person I love more than anybody in the world. Now, how that's not that hard to do, but almost nobody does it. And the first time you do it, not only are you going to feel weird, she's going to feel weird.
She's like,
It's
what's
like,
going
what,
on?
who are you?
Yeah.
And why are you doing this? And again, I'm a big fan of James Clear and Duhigg, who does habits. You do anything for 3 weeks, and it not only stops being weird, it starts being a habit, and then it's natural and it's normal. And if you don't do it, it's going to feel weird. So I think we have a huge lesson we can learn from some of those guys.
Yeah. No, that's really encouraging to hear. It's encouraging to hear because at first I was like, man, is something wrong with me to like feel weird doing this? But it's nice to know. Um, what about for the person out there who feels like, or even the wife out there who could be listening to this, feels like their relationship is completely non-salvageable. It's just like hanging on by less than a thread. Is it possible for that to be redeemed? And I mean, I know that the answer is yes, God can redeem anything, but for the person who feels hopeless, like what's the next step? Like what's the trajectory? How do you change that and fix it?
Yeah, I'm not sure there's only one next step.
Yeah.
Um, I think probably the one that comes to my mind the most is it probably isn't fixable with just your, hard work and diligence.
Mm.
I think at first get on your knees, and I think you got to cry out to God and invite Him into this entire situation. Would be my number one. I used to believe that the only way a marriage could be really solved, for lack of a better term, is if both of the spouses agreed that we have a problem and proactively invested, and we took some steps to go to an intensive, retreat or weekend or marriage counseling or whatever, or read 17 books. I now believe differently
Mm.
that when one of the two spouses is very, very serious and kind of Christ centered in this process, that they can transform their marriage starting with them.
Mm.
And I think that's where the hope exists. I know several couples, Kyle, where the couple has literally been divorced. I mean, that's how unsalvageable it was. And post divorce, end up both growing closer to Christ in the process and recognizing the blind spots that they had. And I don't. Again, I probably know way too many statistics for the benefit of your audience, but I will tell you that the divorce rate for second marriages is substantially higher than for the first. So
Mm.
the person that says, "Man, I must have married the wrong person, and I just have to find my soulmate and the right person," well, guess what? You're bringing the same selfish kind of attributes. You're marrying another entirely new set of issues and selfish attributes, etc. Now you add step kids and step families to the equation. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a if the divorce rate for first marriages is at 45% ish or so, the divorce rate on second marriage is probably closer to 65 or 70. And
Well,
again, you think the grass is greener, but the reality is, sometimes even through divorce, I've said to several men, if your wife is intent on getting a divorce, you can't stop her. You can't control that. You got to trust God with that. The only thing you can do is go vertical, right? Become more and more like Christ, regardless of what happens with your marriage, and trust God to do a mighty work in her. Love her in a non-contingent way. Even if she ends up remarried, we can be the greatest co-parenters in the history of man, right? And you still can control those things. Now, your pride is going to get in the way. Your pride is going to say, "Well, no, she wasn't loyal. She walked away on our covenant relationship, and da da da. And I'm going to get even." Well, again, I love the Dr. Phil question. How's that working for you? Right? It's never going to end well.
yeah.
And I just think it's a different journey. The journey is about God wants to transform us.
Mm.
And I think we start with fix my marriage, God. And I think God's saying, no, draw close to me. You become the man I designed you to be, and you watch what I do in your spouse.
Yeah. Yeah. Last thing I want to chat about, because I think it's a perfect segue. The pink and blue, the diagram that you drew out for us. Just tell people about that, and because that's very interesting.
Yeah, there's two couples that travel probably the world. They're from South Africa, both of them, and they first introduced me to this model, and then I embellished it. But the basic premise is you have an X and Y axis, right? And it's a selfish axis. So, selfish is at the origin. If I can kind of picture it, kind
Yeah.
of at the combination of those axes is very selfish, and we call that the red zone. Okay, so both the male, the husband is selfish, and the female, the wife is selfish. Up in the upper right hand quadrant of this model is the green zone. And the green zone is where we're both fully committed to be unselfish.
Mhm.
The Gottmans would call that a master in marriage. So you're at 5 positive interactions, unselfish interactions for every one that might be even a neutral, right?
Mhm.
Not even a negative. The problem is there's also pink, where the wife goes unselfish. And the problem is when the wife goes unselfish, the man celebrates and says, "Hallelujah, this is awesome. Stay there, honey. I love it when you're pink," right? And the wife, of course, looks over at the guy operating in the blue zone and says, "Well, excuse me, operating in the red zone," and says, "Well, that ain't gonna work."
Mhm.
Because again, she's got a fairness doctrine in her back pocket and says, "I'm coming back to red because at least I'm going to get even."
Yeah.
And what I've found over time, Kyle, is when a man goes to the blue zone and really commits to Christ likeness and unselfishness, I can't understand it entirely, but supernaturally and from the beginning of time, and Ken Nair is the guy who convinced me of this, is that your spouse, your wife, when she sees your genuine, committed unselfishness and sacrificial kind of nature, it does something, God does something profound in her heart, and she wants to join you in that unselfishness. And that's where a couple ends up in the upper right quadrant, which is that awesome green zone. And it feeds on itself because now we're both kind of committed to caring and loving and being kind and responding and looking at the red cardinal in the window in the same way you would with your 3-year-old.
Yeah.
And the problem is, man, couples get stuck in that dang red zone, and it feels like you're never going to get out.
Mm. Yeah. It really, you can feel the weight, at least I can as the man. You can feel the weight of that responsibility, but also you can feel like the hope of it. It's like, man, okay, there is actually hope. It's just I have to step up. Like that's where my mind goes. It's like you have to just step up and lead. And
in
man,
a
it's
non-contingent way.
yeah.
So not relying on, okay, I'll give it 3 days, right? It's literally what I always say, and you've heard me say, Kyle, you and me have to decide what journey we're on.
Mm,
And if the journey you're on is I'm going to do well as long as she does, you will fail. You
mm,
will not be committed. It's like somebody who says, well, I'm going to really like this wedding and this marriage as long as it works out. Right. And when you have a plan B, which is I always have an out, there's a high probability somebody's going to take that out.
yeah.
And what I'm asking guys to do is to say, you go vertical, you make the choice to go Christ-like. It'll impact your marriage, your children, following generations, your work life, your clients, and everything else. And that's where God smiles and says, that's the man, Kyle, I designed you and Peter to be.
Mm, man, that's so cool. For the last question, what's the most, and I'm stealing this, I want to make sure I give credit where credit's due. I listened to Diary of a CEO. I think he does a fantastic job. He asks this to his guests at the end. He says, what's the most important question I've not asked you that I should have asked you so the audience can get that information?
That's a great question.
It is, right? I love that.
Yeah, it really makes you think. I would say the bottom line is I think it might be this. I was literally doing some writing this morning on this topic. You could ask the question, what's the impediment, Peter? What is it inside us that most prevents us from doing this well?
Hmm.
And I think the short answer is we wake up every day and we put our feet on the floor, and most humans have an orientation that starts with me. And the world revolves around my orbit. And I think God designed us differently.
Yeah.
I think he designed us to wake up and put our feet on the floor and to say, man, this is an amazing thing you've created. And I have some challenging relationships and challenging work environments, and I've got to figure out how to make a living or find the next job or whatever it may be. And it's going to be fascinating to see what you orchestrate because this is your world. You are the creator. I am the creation. And the world doesn't revolve. It's like Louis Giglio, a pastor here in town that most people would know in your audience probably, who says it like this. He says, we go and we go through life thinking we're the central actor in the play called life. And boy, isn't it cool that God put a few people around me as the central actor? And I think what I'm trying to do in my life is I'm in the 13th row of the balcony, and I'm just on honored to be able to see what God is doing in this movie or play or whatever it is we're watching, and to see who he puts in my path, and what relationships he forges, and what role he's got for me. I think that's the lack of self-importance
Mm,
that I think may be key in allowing us to get to this place where it's not all about me.
really awesome. Yeah, that concept of the main what is it? The main character syndrome.
Bingo.
Well,
Bingo. Said differently, the
yeah,
narcissistic syndrome, right?
yeah, 100%, and I'm definitely guilty of that too. So, man, this was fantastic. I really um you and I and me being a part of your program and us doing this podcast, and it has come at a very, very perfect time in my life. It's it's exciting because my ex and I are actually we're hanging out again, and that's been really cool.
Awesome.
But she's very skeptical of me, and rightfully so. And she might hear this, and so I just want to be very candid and honest. It's she's very skeptical, and so for me, it's a challenge of I got to step up and I got to do these things that you're talking about, and be a leader. And I have a son to think about. I want him to grow up and be better than I was, and I want to be better than my dad was. And so it's been very great for me. If no one else hears this, just know that like it's been very, very helpful for me.
Well, I'm so delighted to hear that. You made my day. My short kind of response and encouragement to you is trust God.
Mm,
Don't worry about changing anybody else. Just you do you in a way that is selfless, and God's going to do something. He's going to show off. And we're going to talk a year from now, and you're going to say God is showing off in a big way, because she's going to go. My prayer is that she'll go from skeptical, this too shall pass, to wow, I think this is real. And that's when it really gets cool.
awesome.
So good luck in the journey.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your time today. I'll let you know when this is going to be posted, and I'll clip it out and put it on social media and stuff. If anybody really wants to find you and reach out to you, what's the best way that they can reach out to you?
Related to this topic, I have a book and a website. The book is called Men, Your Marriage Matters to God. And the the website is the same, Your Marriage Matters to God,
Okay, cool.
.com.
Okay, cool. Yeah, text that link to me because I'll put it in the show notes. That way people can click on it if they want to. But
Perfect.
I'm really, really thankful for your time today, man. And I'm glad we got to do this a second time and hop on here and get it to work.
We have slayed the technology.